stench. That was the syllable the mother-in-law spat into the woman's face as she stepped into the cramped kitchen, her nose wrinkled as if the very scent of her daughter-in-law's existence was a personal offense to her bloodline. She didn't look at the woman. She looked at the chipped tiles with a cold, biological disgust. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're following a woman who spent 5 years being treated like a ghost in her own house, only for the people who mocked her to find out exactly who she was when it was too late. Before we see how far this family was willing to go to destroy her, hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps us keep these stories going. And let us know where you're watching from in the comments. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Invisible. For 5 years, the woman they called a charity case had been a non-entity, a shadow that scrubbed their flaws and swallowed their insults without a word. They were so busy performing their importance for the world that they never noticed the quiet, steady click of a keyboard in the middle of the night. They thought they knew exactly where she came from and exactly where she was going. But as they prepared to discard her like a piece of refuse, they were about to realize they hadn't even been invited to the real game. They had spent years mocking a woman who was already holding the keys to their destruction, and they wouldn't see it coming until the air in the room finally went cold. The apartment smelled like boiled cabbage and disappointment. Victoria, Tori they called her when they remembered to call her at all, stood at the stove, and watching steam curl up from a pot she couldn't afford to fill properly. Behind her, in the living room that doubled as her mother-in-law's throne room, Constance held court. She's using the cheap cuts again. Constance didn't lower her voice. Never did. I can smell the poverty from here. Tori's fingers went to the hem of her cardigan, found a loose thread, pulled it slowly, methodically, watching the fabric pucker. Mother, please. That was David, her husband. 5 years married, and he still said please to his mother like a child asking permission to breathe. She's doing her best with what you give her, you mean? Constance's laugh was surgical, precise. My son, the patron saint of strays. David worked at his mother's firm. Junior associate at Harrington & Locke, the mid-tier litigation shop that handled personal injury cases and the occasional small business dispute. Nothing glamorous. Constance was a senior paralegal there, had been for 30 years, and she wielded that seniority like a cudgel. Tori had met David at a coffee shop. She'd been reading depositions for a case. He'd been reading fantasy novels. And somehow, that had been enough. He'd seemed softer then, different from the men in her family's world, men who treated conversation like a hostile takeover. She hadn't told him who her family was, not at first. Not ever, actually. The Castellanos didn't do press, didn't need to. When your grandfather built half the commercial real estate in 3 states, when your mother sat on the boards of institutions that decided where cities grew and died, you didn't chase publicity, like you bought the publications. But Tori had wanted something else, something that felt like it belonged to her, not to a portfolio or a legacy. So she'd gone to law school under her mother's maiden name, Morrison, and she'd kept her head down, worked in legal aid, met David, told herself she was building something real. Dinner's ready, Tori said, voice flat, affect dead. Constance swept into the kitchen like she was touring a slum. Her eyes catalogued everything. The chipped plates, the mismatched glasses, the pot with the handle held on by electrical tape. Charming. The word was acid. "David, darling, you really must speak to Anderson about that raise. This is—" She gestured vaguely at everything. "Verminous." Tori set the plates down. Cheap pasta, canned sauce, and the kind of meal that would have made her family's private chef resign on principle. David ate without looking at her. That was new. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe she'd just started noticing. "I saw Rebecca today," Constance said, pronging a piece of pasta like it might contaminate her. "She asked about you, about when you're planning to do something with your life." "I work at the legal aid clinic 3 days a week." Tori's voice came out measured, careful. "Oh, yes, the clinic." Constance's smile was all teeth, helping the unwashed masses file for food stamps. Very noble, very quaint. Someone has to. Someone without options, perhaps. Constance dabbed her mouth. "Someone without breeding. But you married into this family, dear. The Harringtons have standards." David said nothing, just kept eating, kept not looking. Just Tori felt the thread between her fingers, pulled until it snapped. Later, after Constance had left, after she'd inspected the bathroom and commented on the mildew, after she'd suggested Tori might want to reconsider her life choices, David sat on their bed, scrolling his phone. "You could have backed me up," Tori said. Quiet. "She doesn't mean it. She called our home verminous. That's just how she talks." He didn't look up. "You're too sensitive." Tori stood in the doorway, watched him. This man she'd married because he'd seemed kind, because he'd seemed like he existed outside the machinery of wealth and power that had defined her entire life. He looked small now, soft, like something that had never been tested. "I'm going to work," she said. "It's 9 at night. Pro bono case. Discovery's due Monday." He grunted, already back to his phone, already gone. Tori walked 3 blocks to a cafe that stayed open late, ordered black coffee, opened her laptop. The screen glowed blue in the darkness. She logged into a secure portal, entered a 12-digit password, waited. The interface was clean, professional, the kind of thing that costs 6 figures to build and maintain. Castellano Holdings, private equity, real estate, venture capital, the kind of money that made politicians return calls within the hour. Tori scrolled through acquisition reports, property holdings, shell companies nested inside shell companies like Russian dolls made of legal paper. She'd been tracking something, a pattern. 3 years of watching her family's firm move assets, liquidate holdings, restructure debt. They were preparing for something. She didn't know what yet, but she'd figure it out. She always did. Her phone buzzed. Text from David. "When are you coming home?" She stared at it, thought about the apartment, the kitchen, the look on his face when his mother spoke. She typed, "Late. Don't wait up." The cursor blinked in the silence. The firm's holiday party was held at a hotel ballroom that tried very hard to look expensive. It failed, but nobody seemed to notice. Tori wore a dress she'd found at a consignment shop. Black. Simple. The kind of thing that disappeared into backgrounds. Jesus! David had looked at her like she'd shown up in a garbage bag. "That's what you're wearing." "It's fine." "It's not fine. My mother's partners will be there. Clients. You look like you're going to a funeral." "I thought you said I was too sensitive." His jaw did something. Some small spasm of irritation. "Just try to blend in, okay? Don't embarrass me." The ballroom smelled like cheap champagne and cheaper cologne. Constance was already there, of course, surrounded by her usual cluster of sycophants and climbers. She saw Tori. Her smile could have drawn blood. Victoria, how unexpected. She turned to the woman beside her, some corporate attorney with too much Botox and not enough self-awareness. This is my daughter-in-law, David's little project. Lovely to meet you. The attorney's handshake was limp, perfunctory. Her eyes were already moving past Tori to someone more important. Tori works at a legal aid clinic, Constance said, the way someone might say, Tori collects roadkill. How fulfilling. The attorney had already turned away. Tori stood there, invisible, exactly as intended. David was across the room, laughing too loud at something Anderson, the senior partner, had said. He caught her eye for half a second, looked away. The bathrooms were down a long hallway. Tori locked herself in a stall, pulled out her phone. 17 new emails. Most were from the clinic. 2 were from encrypted addresses she recognized. She opened the first one. Asset transfer complete. Harrington personal accounts flagged for review. Pattern suggests preparation for liability shield. Recommends surveillance of upcoming case filings. Tori read it twice. Felt something cold settle in her chest. Harrington, as in Anderson Harrington, David's boss, Constance's boss. She opened the second email. Property records show 3 new LLCs registered under Constance H. variant names. Timing aligns with firm's Q4 billing irregularities. Lines suggest cross-reference with client trust accounts. Tori closed her eyes, breathed. She'd hired the forensic accountants 6 months ago, paid them out of a trust fund her grandmother had left her. Money that existed in a web of legal structures so complex even the IRS gave up trying to map it. She'd told herself she was just being careful, just protecting herself. But she'd known. On some level, she'd known. The door to the bathroom opened. Voices, laughter. Absolutely pathetic. Did you see that dress? Tori recognized the voice. Rebecca, one of Constance's golf friends. Constance says she found her at some coffee shop. Can you imagine? David could have had anyone. Well, he's not exactly a catch himself, is he? More laughter. Soft, like his father. Constance says she's thinking of staging an intervention. He's suggesting David cut his losses before there are children involved. God, can you imagine? Those genes mixing with whatever bottom feeder stock she came from? Tori stayed very still. Listened to them reapply lipstick. Listened to them leave. Then she stood, washed her hands, looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was thin, pale, worn down like a stone in a river. But her eyes were calculating. She pulled up her contacts, found a name, Dr. Joanna Rhodes, family attorney, the woman who'd helped Tori set up the trust structures that hid her real identity. Need to accelerate timeline, Tori typed. How quickly can we move? The response came back in seconds. On your word. Everything's ready. Tori stared at the phone, at her reflection, at the version of herself she'd been pretending to be. 5 years. For 5 years of making herself small, of swallowing contempt like it was nourishment. She thought about David, about the way he looked through her now, like she was glass, like she was already gone. She thought about Constance, about the word verminous, about biological disgust. She typed, "Stand by, soon." Back in the ballroom, David was drunk. Not falling down drunk, just loose, sloppy. There she is. He threw an arm around her shoulders. My wife, the do-gooder. Anderson smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. David tells me you work in public service. Legal aid. Admirable. We all have to give back, I suppose. He said it the way someone might discuss cleaning up litter. Though I imagine the work is rather rudimentary. People need help navigating systems designed to exclude them. Tori's voice was steady, empty of inflection. Systems, Anderson chuckled. Yes, well, some people are simply better equipped to navigate than others, aren't they? Breeding tells. David laughed. Actually laughed. Tori felt something crystallize inside her, something sharp and cold and permanent. Excuse me, she said. I need some air. Nobody stopped her. Nobody noticed her leave. Outside, the night was cold. She stood on the sidewalk, watching her breath cloud in the darkness. Her phone buzzed. Another encrypted email. Confirmation. Harrington and Locke under investigation for trust account misappropriation. Federal inquiry opened 2 weeks ago. Firm partners unaware. Estimated timeline to indictment 60 to 90 days. Tori read it 3 times. Then she smiled. Not a big smile, just a small thing. Private. The kind of smile that would have terrified anyone who understood what it meant. But the divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday. Tori was at the clinic, helping a single mother fill out housing discrimination forms when her phone lit up with a text from David. We need to talk. Tonight. She knew before she opened the door. Knew from the way he couldn't look at her. Knew from the way Constance sat on their couch like she owned it, which technically she did. The lease was in her name. Sit down, Victoria. Constance gestured to a chair like she was granting an audience. Tori sat, waited. David cleared his throat. This isn't working. You know that, right? We're not compatible. Compatible. You're not happy. I'm not happy. He was reading from a script. Tori could almost see the words written on his forehead. It's better if we just win this cleanly. Cleanly. Stop repeating everything, Constance snapped. You're not a parrot. Show some dignity. Tori looked at her. Really looked. At the expensive suit that was just a half size too tight. At the jewelry that was real but not quite expensive enough. At the desperation underneath the contempt. You've already drafted papers, Tori said. David had the decency to look embarrassed. Mother thought it would be easier if we had everything ready. No lawyers, no fighting, just quick, quick. There's no assets to split anyway, Constance said. You came into this marriage with nothing. You'll leave with nothing. It's equitable. Tori felt something bloom in her chest. Something that might have been laughter if it wasn't so dark. I see. You'll need to be out by the end of the month, Constance continued. I'm sure you can find somewhere suitable. Perhaps one of those shelters you're so fond of helping. David winced. Mother. What? I'm being practical. She works with these people. I'm sure they can accommodate one of their own. Tori stood, walked to the bedroom, came back with her purse. I'll have my things out by Friday, she said. David blinked. That's it? You're not going to fight this? Why would I fight? Tori looked at him. This man who'd seemed so different, so safe. You're right. We're not compatible. We never were. Something flickered across his face. Surprise? Disappointment? She couldn't tell. Didn't care. Well, Constance stood, smoothed her skirt. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. It's the first sensible thing you've done since you trapped my son into marrying you. Trapped. Please. I'm coffee shop meet cute. Textbook gold digger behavior. Constance's smile was surgical. Though I'll admit, you aimed rather low. David's hardly a prize, but I suppose beggars can't be choosers. David said nothing, just stood there, looking at his shoes. Tori walked them to the door, watched them leave, listened to Constance's voice fade down the hallway. Probably relieved. Now he can find someone with proper breeding. The door closed. Silence. Tori pulled out her phone. Dialed. "Dr. Rhodes, it's time." "You're certain?" "Absolutely." "Very well. I'll begin the filings tomorrow. How public do you want this?" Tori thought about the word verminous, about the laughter in the bathroom, about David's face when his mother called her a trap. "Scorched earth," she said. I want them to see it coming just long enough to understand what they missed." "Understood. I'll need you to sign some documents. Can you come to the office?" "Tonight." She hung up, looked around the apartment, at the chipped tiles, at the cheap furniture, at the life she'd built on a foundation of pretending. Then she started packing. Dr. Rhodes's office was in a building with actual security, real marble, the kind of place where the air tasted like money. The attorney was in her 60s, sharp, precise, the kind of woman who billed by the quarter hour and was worth every cent. "Before we proceed," she said, sliding a folder across the desk, "I want to confirm you understand what you're authorizing." Tori opened the folder. Legal documents, dense, technical. "This will expose your identity," Dr. Rhodes continued. "Your family, your holdings, everything you've been hiding for 5 years." "I understand." "Your husband will discover that you are, in fact, Victoria Castellano, sole heir to a fortune estimated at approximately $3.2 billion. He will learn that while he was patronizing you about finding better employment, you were managing a portfolio that generates more in quarterly dividends than his mother's firm bills in a year. Good. His mother will learn that the woman she called verminous has more legal and financial resources than everyone she knows combined, that her firm is currently being investigated for embezzlement, and that the forensic accountants who uncovered the evidence were paid for by you. Even better, Dr. Rhodes leaned back. This will destroy them." "I know. And you're comfortable with that?" Tori thought about 5 years, about making herself small, about swallowing contempt until it became background noise. "They had 5 years to see me," she said. "They chose not to. That's on them." Dr. Rhodes slid a pen across the desk. "Then sign." Tori signed. The first filing hit the public record at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday. Victoria Castellano versus David Harrington, dissolution of marriage, filed in Superior Court with a request for expedited proceedings. The second filing hit 30 minutes later. Castellano Holdings, LLC versus Harrington and Locke, LLP. Civil suit alleging fraud, embezzlement, and misappropriation of client funds. Damages sought. $47 million. The third filing was the nuclear option. State Bar of California versus Constance Harrington, yes, Anderson Harrington, et al. Formal ethics complaint. Evidence of trust, account violations, witness statements, forensic accounting reports, 300 pages of documentation that read like a manual for white-collar crime. David called at 9:47 a.m. Tori was at a cafe, drinking coffee that cost more than their former monthly grocery budget, watching the news alerts roll in on her phone. She let it ring. He called again, and again, and again. She answered on the 5th call. "What the hell is happening?" His voice was strangled, desperate. "The firm. There are lawyers here. Federal lawyers. They're talking about indictments. They're saying, 'Tori, who are you?' You never asked." "What?" 5 years. You never asked where I came from, what I did before I met you. You just assumed. You said You worked at legal aid. You said you went to state school. I said I went to law school. You assumed state school, because that fit the narrative you wanted. Silence. Then, Castellano. Victoria Castellano. You're Jesus. You're that Castellano? Yes. And you just, what, played poor this whole time? I wanted to see if anyone would notice me without the name, without the money. Turns out they won't. This is insane. You're insane. Maybe. The lawsuit. The ethics complaint. That's you? Yes. Why? His voice cracked. Why are you doing this? Tori took a sip of coffee, watched the sunlight stream through the window. Your mother called me verminous, called our home verminous, called my existence stench. She didn't mean, and you said nothing. You laughed when Anderson said breeding tells. You handed me divorce papers like I was a problem to be solved. You treated me like refuse for 5 years, and you never once looked at me long enough to see who I actually was. So this is revenge? No. Tori's voice was cold, empty. This is consequence. You chose to see me as nothing. Now you get to live with that choice. The firm is going to be destroyed. My mother could go to prison. I could lose my license. Then you should have kept better company. Please, Tori, please, we can fix this. I'll do anything. Just stop this. Please. She heard it then. The desperation, the fear, the sound of someone realizing they'd miscalculated catastrophically. No, she said, and hung up. Constance showed up at the cafe 20 minutes later. Tori had been expecting her. The older woman looked diminished, smaller, but like something left out in the rain. You vindictive little parasite. She slid into the chair across from Tori without being invited. You planned this, all of it. No, I planned to have a marriage. You planned this. 5 years. 5 years of pretending to be some pathetic charity case, lying to everyone, to my son. I never lied. I just didn't correct your assumptions. This is fraud, entrapment. I'll have you. You'll have me what? Tori leaned forward. Investigated? I have 17 attorneys on retainer. I've been documenting every interaction we've had for 3 years, every insult, every dismissal, every time you treated me like something you scraped off your shoe. Constance's face went white. The embezzlement investigation? Tori continued. I paid for that. The forensic accountants who traced your little shell game with client trust funds, my money, the ethics complaint, my filing, the civil suit, my damages, because it turns out when you steal from clients, some of those clients are my family's portfolio companies. You can't. I already did. And you know the beautiful part? None of this is personal. It's just business. You stole money. You violated ethical rules. You committed crimes. I'm simply ensuring there are consequences. David will hate you for this. David already saw me as nothing. This doesn't change anything except his bank account. Constance stood. Her hands were shaking. You're a monster. No. Tori's voice was flat, dead. I'm just someone you didn't bother to see until it was too late. The monster was always there. You just assumed she was too weak to bite back. Constance left, stumbled really, like someone who'd just been hit by a car they never saw coming. Tori finished her coffee, opened her laptop, checked her email. The Forbes article was already up. Billionaire Heiress operated undercover in legal aid for 5 years. The photo they'd used was from a charity gala 3 years before she'd met David. She was wearing a dress that cost more than his annual salary, standing next to her mother and a senator. She looked like a different person, harder, colder, more like her mother. She wondered if that woman would have let herself be treated like stench. Probably not. The divorce hearing was a formality. 10 minutes in a courthouse that smelled like floor wax and bureaucracy. David showed up alone. Well, his mother was already in federal custody, bail denied, and his father had apparently fled to his sister's house in Arizona. He looked broken, hollowed out. "I loved you," he said, outside the courtroom. "I know I didn't show it well, but I did." "You loved the version of me you invented," Tori said. "You never met the real me. You never wanted to." "That's not fair." "Isn't it? Name one thing about me that you actually know. One thing that isn't a projection or an assumption." He opened his mouth, closed it. "Exactly." The hearing itself was brief. The judge looked bored. The settlement was standard. No shared assets, no alimony. Clean break. David had signed off on everything. He didn't have a choice. His legal fees alone were going to bankrupt him. Tori walked out of the courthouse into perfect sunshine. Her phone was ringing. Her mother. "Darling, I saw the news." "Hello, Mother." 5 years. You could have told us. You would have interfered." A pause, then a laugh. Cold, appreciative. "Fair. Are you coming home?" "Eventually. The board wants to meet with you. There are positions opening up. Your father's ready to transition some of his holdings." "Mother, not now." "Fine. But Victoria, that thing with the law firm, the ethics complaint." Another pause. "Nicely done. Surgical. Your grandfather would have been proud." The line went dead. Tori stood on the courthouse steps, looked at the city spread out below her, all that concrete and glass and human ambition. She'd spent 5 years trying to exist outside of it, trying to be someone simpler, someone whose worth wasn't measured in portfolio performance and quarterly earnings. It hadn't worked, because the world didn't let you opt out. It just waited for you to stop pretending. Her phone buzzed. "Dr. Rhodes, firm filed for bankruptcy. Partners are cooperating with federal prosecutors. Your testimony won't be needed. It's over." Tori typed back, "Thank you." She thought about calling David, saying something final, some closing argument. But what was there to say? He'd looked at her and seen nothing. That was the whole story. She walked to her car. A Tesla she'd been keeping in a private garage for 3 years. She'd taken the bus to and from the apartment. Let David think she couldn't afford a car. The leather smelled new, expensive, real. She drove to her mother's house, the main estate, 23,000 square feet of architectural significance and emotional sterility. Her mother was waiting in the library, tall, severe. "I'm the kind of woman who chaired committees and ended careers with a phone call." "So," she said, "you're done playing poor?" "I wasn't playing." "Weren't you?" Her mother poured 2 glasses of scotch, aged, rare. "You've always had a theatrical streak, even as a child. I wanted to know if anyone would see me without all this." Tori gestured at the room, at the wealth, at the machinery of power. "And?" "They didn't." Her mother handed her a glass. "Of course they didn't. People see what they want to see, what they need to see to maintain their own narratives. You know this. I taught you this. You taught me a lot of things, and you rejected most of them, until now." Her mother sat, studied her. What changed? Tori thought about it, about 5 years of making herself small, about the word verminous, about David's face when his mother spoke. "I learned that poverty isn't noble," she said. "It's just poverty, and people don't respect suffering. They despise it. They see it as weakness, as failure, as something repellent. And I'm done pretending to be weak. Her mother smiled. It was the first genuine expression Tori had seen from her in years. Good. You have a board meeting on Friday. Wear the Armani, the grey one, and Victoria. She raised her glass. Welcome home. They drank in silence. 6 months later, Tori sat in a glass-walled office 40 stories above the city. Her office, corner suite, views that cost more per square foot than most people earned in a year. She was reviewing acquisition proposals when her assistant buzzed. Dr. Rhodes on line 2. Tori picked up. Joanna, have you seen the news? Which news? Harrington and Locke officially dissolved. Anderson pleaded guilty to 12 counts of fraud. Constance took a deal. 3 years federal prison. David surrendered his law license. Tori said nothing. You're quiet. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. Vindicated? Maybe. Tori looked out at the city, at all those people scrambling and climbing and destroying each other for scraps. Mostly, I just feel tired. That's normal. You spent 5 years in a state of siege. Your nervous system needs time to adjust. Joanna, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think I'm cruel? A pause. Then, I think you're efficient. I think you saw a problem and solved it. Whether that's cruel depends on whether you believe people deserve consequences for their choices. And you? I've been practicing law for 40 years, Victoria. I've seen what happens when people face no consequences. They metastasize, they spread, they consume everything around them until someone stops them. Another pause. You stop them. How you feel about that is between you and your conscience. They hung up. Tori sat in her office, in her expensive chair, in her expensive suit, in her expensive life. Her phone lit up. A message from a number she didn't recognize. This is David. I know I have no right to contact you. I know what my family did was unforgivable. But I need you to know I'm sorry. For all of it. For not seeing you. For not protecting you. For being too weak to stand up to my mother. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to say it. Tori read it 3 times, then deleted it. Some apologies came too late. Some damage couldn't be repaired with words. She thought about responding, thought about telling him that she'd forgiven him, that she understood. But that would be a lie, and she was done lying. She turned back to her computer, to the acquisition proposals, to the work of building empires and crushing competitors. This was who she'd always been, who she'd been raised to be. The 5-year detour had been just that, a detour, an experiment, a failed attempt to be something softer. She'd learned her lesson. People didn't respect softness, they exploited it. They called it stench and verminous and parasitic, and then they tried to discard you when you'd served your purpose. Her mother had been right. Her grandfather had been right. The world was a machine that consumed weakness and rewarded strength, and the only choice was which side you wanted to be on. Tori had made her choice. 3 weeks later, she was at a charity gala, the kind where wealthy people perform generosity for each other while drinking wine that cost more than rent. She was talking to a senator about infrastructure funding when she saw him. David. He was serving drinks, wearing a vest and bow tie, moving through the crowd like a ghost. Their eyes met, just for a second. He looked away first. Tori felt something twist in her chest. Not quite pity, not quite satisfaction. Something unnamed and uncomfortable. She excused herself, walked to the terrace, looked out at the city lights. A voice behind her. "You're Victoria Castellano." She turned. A man, 30s, kind eyes, wearing a suit that was expensive but not showy. "I am. I'm Gabriel. I run a foundation that does literacy programs in underserved communities. I was hoping to talk to you about funding." "You want money?" "Everyone wants money," he smiled. "I want conversation first. Maybe money later, if you think the work matters. And if I don't, then we shake hands and I move on to the next billionaire." He gestured to the party. "There's certainly no shortage." Tori found herself smiling. Actually smiling. "Tell me about your foundation," she said. They talked for an hour. About literacy rates, about generational poverty, about systems designed to keep people trapped, and the work of building ladders out. He didn't ask about her marriage, about the scandal, about any of it. He just talked about the work, like it mattered more than she did. It was refreshing. "I'll have my people send over a proposal," she said finally. "Thank you. That's all I can ask." He started to leave, then stopped. "Can I say something potentially inappropriate?" "Go ahead." "Whatever happened with your ex-husband, with his family? I read about it, and I just want to say, good. People like that, they cause so much damage, they create so much suffering, and they never face consequences because they hide behind respectability and breeding and all that aristocratic nonsense. So good. I'm glad you didn't let them get away with it." Tori blinked. "You're the first person to say that." "Really? Most people either congratulate me like I won a game, or they look at me like I'm a monster. You're neither. You're just someone who refused to be destroyed quietly. That's not monstrous. That's survival." He left, disappeared back into the crowd. Tori stood on the terrace, felt something loosen in her chest. Some knot she hadn't realized was there. Maybe she wasn't a monster. Maybe she was just someone who'd learned to bite back, who'd learned that the world didn't reward martyrdom or nobility or suffering in silence. Maybe that was enough. Later that night, alone in her apartment, the penthouse she'd been renting under a shell company for 2 years, Tori opened her laptop. She pulled up the legal aid clinic's website, the place where she'd spent 3 days a week for 5 years, the place where she'd actually helped people instead of just managing portfolios. They were understaffed, underfunded, barely holding on. She opened a new email, addressed it to the clinic's director. "I'd like to discuss establishing an endowment. What's enough to expand your services permanently, enough to hire more attorneys and support staff, enough to make a real difference. Please contact my office to arrange a meeting." She signed it, Victoria Castellano. Then she leaned back, looked at the city through her windows, at all that light and darkness and human chaos. She'd spent 5 years trying to be invisible, trying to exist outside the machinery of wealth and power. It hadn't worked because the machinery didn't let you opt out. It just kept grinding. But maybe she didn't have to opt out. Maybe she could just redirect the machinery, point it at something that mattered. Maybe that was the only revenge that actually counted. Not destroying the people who'd hurt her, but building something they'd never understand, something that existed beyond their tiny, vicious world. She closed her laptop, turned off the lights, stood in the darkness. Tomorrow, she had 3 board meetings and an acquisition call with a venture capital firm in Singapore. Tomorrow, she would be Victoria Castellano, billionaire, power broker, the woman her family had raised her to be. But tonight, just for a moment, she let herself be Tori, the woman who'd scrubbed floors and swallowed insults and believed that maybe people could see her without all the machinery. They couldn't. She knew that now, but maybe that was okay. Maybe being seen wasn't the point. Maybe the point was just surviving, and then building something worth surviving for. She went to bed. Outside, the city kept grinding. Inside, Tori slept the sleep of someone who'd finally stopped pretending. The war was over, she'd won, and somewhere across the city, and in a tiny apartment that smelled like mildew and regret, David Harrington stared at his phone, at the deleted message, at the woman he'd never really known. He thought about calling again, apologizing again, begging for another chance. But he knew what the answer would be. Some doors, once closed, stayed closed. Some consequences were permanent. He'd learned that lesson the hard way, in a courtroom, in a bankruptcy filing, in the look on his mother's face when the federal marshals led her away. He'd thought he knew who she was, the poor girl from the coffee shop, the charity case, the woman who smelled like stench. He'd been wrong about all of it. And now, he got to live with that wrongness for the rest of his life. That was the real punishment. Not the money, not the career, not even the humiliation, but just the knowledge that he'd had something real, someone real, and he'd thrown it away because he couldn't see past his own assumptions. His mother had taught him to see the world in terms of breeding and stock and verminous poverty. And now, that vision had destroyed them both. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. He turned off his phone, turned off the lights, lay down in the darkness. Tomorrow he had a shift at the restaurant, serving drinks to the kind of people who used to defer to him, to his mother, to the family name that didn't mean anything anymore. Tomorrow, he would smile and nod and take their orders and try not to think about the woman who'd escaped. But tonight, he let himself remember. The coffee shop, the fantasy novels, the moment when everything had still been possible. Before he'd learned that some people can't be saved from themselves. Before he'd learned that privilege is just another word for blindness. Before he'd learned that the real monsters don't announce themselves. They just wear familiar faces and whisper familiar lies until you can't tell the difference between protection and cage. He closed his eyes, tried to sleep, failed. Outside, the city kept grinding. Inside, David Harrington lived with his choices. The war was over, he'd lost. And somewhere in a penthouse, 40 stories above everything, Victoria Castellano slept like the dead, dreamless, free. The woman they'd called verminous, the woman they'd called stench, the woman they'd tried to erase. She'd survived, she'd rebuilt, she'd won. And tomorrow, she would wake up and keep winning. Because that's what predators do. They survive, they adapt, they consume, and they never, ever apologize for being exactly what the world made them. If that ending gave you chills, you're not alone. Hit the subscribe button and the bell so you never miss another moment of justice. Like the video and drop a comment below. Did the husband get what he deserved? I'll be in the comments chatting with you all.